Hilda, Chapter 6, Home, Part 2. We both stared at the ground, the weight of the silence pressing down on us like an unbearable burden. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with the unspoken truths that hung between us. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every beat echoing with fear, guilt, and uncertainty. Finally, Barra broke the silence, her voice soft but tinged with deep sadness. Paul would definitely say your name to them, Hilda. You know that, don't you? She didn't look at me when she spoke, her eyes fixed on the floor, as though the words were too painful to meet my gaze. My stomach twisted into knots at her words. Of course I knew what kind of torture Paul was enduring right now. I had seen glimpses of it with my own eyes, seen the horror in his face, the agony in his screams. I had heard my own father's voice, cold and devoid of mercy, ordering the pain that would be inflicted on him. And the worst part, Paul was suffering because of me, because he had protected us. I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper, as I replied, I don't know what to do. The words felt empty, hollow, as though I had been drained of all the strength I had left. Bowers sighed deeply, finally lifting her eyes to meet mine. Her face was lined with worry, her brows furrowed as if she carried the weight of my troubles on her own shoulders. There isn't much you can do, not right now, but you need to understand, Hilda. They won't stop until they find you, and Otto. They know you escaped, and Paul, I don't know how much longer he can hold on. Her words cut through me like a knife, slicing through the thin walls of hope I had been clinging to. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears at bay. I wanted to believe that Paul could withstand the torture, that he could somehow outlast the pain without betraying me, but deep down I knew that was a fantasy. No one could endure what he was going through for long. But what if it doesn't say anything? I asked, the desperation creeping into my voice. What if he keeps quiet? Frau Bauer gave me a sad smile, shaking her head. They'll break him, Hilda. No one is immune to that kind of suffering. The question isn't if he'll tell them, it's when. A sickening wave of guilt washed over me. I had always admired Paul for his strength, for his unwavering belief in our cause. He had been the one who brought us together, the glue that held the group intact, and now he was suffering for it, suffering because of me. I pressed my hands to my face, rubbing my temples as I tried to think. I should have stayed, I should not run away. No, Bauer said quickly, her voice firm. If you had stayed, they would have caught you too, and who knows what would have happened to you by now. I know, I said, lowering my hands to my lap, but it feels like I abandoned him. Frau Bauer sat down beside me, placing her hand gently on my shoulder. Her touch was warm, grounding, like a tether to the present moment. You didn't abandon him, Hilda. You did what you had to do, and now we have to figure out how to keep you safe. I looked at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Where can I go? I can't go home. Bauer stood up, pacing the room for a moment before turning to face me. There's one place, the basement. It's not much, but it's safe, for now. I blinked, the idea of hiding in her basement sending a chill down my spine. You think that's safe? I asked, my voice uncertain. It's not ideal, she admitted, her brow furrowing again. But it's the best we have. No one ever goes down there. It's been used for storage for years. If they come looking for you here, it's unlikely they search the basement first. I stood up, feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me. The idea of hiding away in the dark, surrounded by old boxes and forgotten furniture, filled me with dread. But what other choice did I have? There was nowhere else to go. I don't want to put you at risk, I said quietly. If they find out you're hiding me, they'll arrest you too. Bauer's eyes softened as she stepped closer to me. Hilda, I've already made my decision. I can't turn my back on you. You're like family to me. Her words struck me, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I hadn't felt like I belonged anywhere in so long, but standing here in this moment, I realized how much Bauer meant to me. She was the closest thing I had to a home. a refugee in the storm. "Come," she said gently, taking my hand. "Let's see if the basement will work." I followed her as she led me through her house, down a narrow set of stairs. The basement was dimly lit, the air cool and musty. Old wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes and books covered in dust. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the room. "It's not much," she said, looking around, "but you should be safe here." I nodded, trying to push away the rising panic in my chest. The thought of hiding down here, cut off from the world, made my skin crawl, but I had no choice. I sat down on an old chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over me. The fear and adrenaline of the past few days had drained me, and now, with the prospect of hiding in this basement, I felt a crushing sense of isolation. "Do you think they'll come here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Frau Bauer admitted, "but if they do, we'll be ready." I looked around the room, taking in the walls that would be my shelter for who knows how long. It was cold and the air smelled stale, but it was safe, or as safe as I could hope for in a world that had turned so dangerous. "I'll bring down some blankets and pillow," she said, moving towards the stairs. "We'll make this as comfortable as we can." As she left, I sat in the stillness of the basement, my thoughts spinning. This was my life now, hiding, running, always looking over my shoulder, and yet, in this dark, damp room, I felt a glimmer of something familiar, safety. It wasn't home, not really, but it was something, and for now, that would have to be enough. As I walked through the dimly lit basement, my footsteps echoed faintly on the concrete floor. I was tired, overwhelmed by everything that had happened, and my mind was racing. That's when I felt it, something beneath my feet, a slight unevenness in the ground. I stopped and looked down, noticing a faint outline of a small square etched into the floor. It was barely noticeable, hidden beneath the layer of dust and debris, but now that I was standing directly over it, I could feel the subtle shift in the ground. Curious, I knelt down, brushing away the dust with my hands, and I saw it clearly. A small, almost imperceptible opening, a hole, or a trapdoor, tucked away beneath the clutter of the basement. My heart quickened as I pried my finger into the thin gap, pulling gently until the door creaked open. There was a hollow space beneath, dark and narrow, but deep enough for someone my size to crawl inside. I leaned over, peering into the shadowy depths, and my pulse quickened. This was it. If things went wrong, if the Gestapo came, this could be my hiding place. It wasn't much, but it might just save me. I was still staring into the hole when I heard footsteps behind me. I stood up quickly, brushing off my hands just as Bauer appeared at the bottom of the stairs, holding a bundle of blankets and pillows in her arms. She looked at me curiously, her eyes narrowing as she saw me standing near the trapdoor. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I glanced back at the small hall, my mind racing. "I found this," I said, pointing to the opening in the floor. "I didn't know it was here." Bauer set the blankets down on a nearby chair and walked over to where I stood. She knelt beside me, looking down into the space. Her face was unreadable for a moment, then her expression softened, as though she understood exactly what I was thinking. "This place," I said, my voice low and hesitant. "If something happens, if they come for me, I could hide here, couldn't I?" She didn't answer right away, her eyes still fixed on the small opening. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Yes, you could." We stood there in silence for a moment, both of us staring at the dark space beneath the floor, the weight of what we were discussing setting heavily between us. It felt surreal to be planning for something so terrifying, to be thinking about hiding from the people who were hunting me, and yet, in the moment, it felt necessary. "It's small," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "but I think I could fit." Bauer nodded again, her gaze turning back to me. "If things get bad, Hilda, you'll need to move quickly. You won't have much time." Her words sent a chill down my spine. She was right. If the Gestapo found out I was here, there wouldn't be time to think. There wouldn't be time for hesitation or second guessing. I would have to act fast, or it would be over. I'll need to keep it clear, I said, glancing around the boxes and crates that littered the basement floor, in case I need to get in. Bauer stood up, brushing off her hands. We'll make sure of that. No one will know it's Zia. I looked up at her, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. The fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but the knowledge that there was a plan, however small, made it a little easier to breathe. I could hide. I could survive. Bauer must have sensed the change in me, because she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You're strong. I've seen it. Her words were kind, but they felt like a distant echo, something I wasn't sure I couldn't believe. I didn't feel strong, I felt lost, and yet, standing here in this basement, with the faint outline of an escape route at my feet, I felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We worked in silence after that, clearing the area around the trapdoor, making sure there was nothing to block my way if I needed to move quickly. Bauer brought down more supplies, food, water, a lantern, in case I had to stay down there for longer than a few hours. It was a grim task, preparing for the worst, but it was necessary. We couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. As we finished, I sat down on the edge of the small opening, staring into the darkness below. How long do you think I'll have to hide? I asked quietly. Bauer looked at me, her face lined with concern. I don't know, she admitted, but as long as it takes. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over me like a heavy blanket. There was no way to know how long I would have to stay hidden, no way to predict how long the Gestapo would search for me. All I could do was wait, hope, and be ready. If they come here, I said softly, will you be safe? Bauer's expression darkened for a moment, but she quickly covered it with a fake smile. Bauer's expression darkened for a moment, but she quickly covered it with a soft smile. Don't worry about me, Hilda. I'll manage. You're the one they're looking for, not me. But if they find out, they won't, she said firmly, cutting me off. I've been careful. They won't find you here. Her confidence was reassuring, but the doubt still lingered in the back of my mind. I wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that we were safe, but after everything that had happened, it was hard to hold on to that belief. Just remember, she said, her voice softening, if you need to hide, don't hesitate, don't wait. Get into that hole and don't come out until it's safe. I nodded, swallowing hard as I looked down at the dark space beneath me. It was small, cramped, but it was a lifeline, and if it came to that, I would take it. Bauer placed a hand on my shoulder, giving me a gentle squeeze. You'll be all right, Hilda. We'll get through this. I looked up at her, feeling a swell of gratitude rise in my chest. Thank you, I whispered, for everything. She smiled, though her eyes were still shadowed with worry. Go get some rest, she said gently. We'll figure out the next steps in the morning. I nodded, standing up from the edge of the trapdoor. As I walked away, I glanced back at the small opening in the floor, the space that might just save my life. It wasn't much, but for now, it was enough. 5 days passed just like that, slipping through my fingers like sand, each hour blending into the next. The basement, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had transformed into my world, a cramped sanctuary where I was forced to confront the reality of my situation. Bauer had set some rules, and we adhered to them with an unspoken understanding of their importance. Rule number 1. No sneaking out of the basement. The idea of venturing beyond the confines of that dark space felt both enticing and terrifying. I craved fresh air, the feeling of sunlight on my skin, the simple joy of being outside, but I knew the danger. If I stepped out, if I allowed curiosity to lead me astray, I might not have time to retreat to my hidden sanctuary if the Gestapo came knocking. The first few days were the hardest. I had grown accustomed to the cacophony of life outside, the sound of children playing, the distant murmur of neighbors going about their daily routines, but now that word felt like a distant memory. I was cut off from everything I had known, from the life I had taken for granted. The only company I had was the muffled sounds of Bauer moving around the house above me and the quiet rustling of my own thoughts. Bauer kept to her routines, bringing down food and water, checking on me regularly. She would sit with me for a while, talking softly about the weather or the garden, anything to maintain a semblance of normalcy. We avoided the darker topics. What would happen if I were discovered? How long I might have to remain hidden? Instead, we focused on the small comforts, the warmth of blankets she brought, the comforting smell of freshly baked bread, the flicker of the lantern's light against the stone wall. Each evening, as the lights dimmed, I would sit on the edge of the trapdoor, staring into the darkness below. I would imagine the world outside, the life still being lived without fear, and I would feel a deep ache for the life I had lost. I was a prisoner in a basement, but the more I accepted it, the more I realized that this was a new reality I had to navigate. We had set additional rules too. Rule number 2: keep the basement door locked and bottled from the inside. Bauer had reinforced it, ensuring that no one could stumble upon my hiding place by accident. The sound of the lock clicking into place each night was a small comfort, a reminder that I was still safe, at least for now. Rule number 3 was perhaps the hardest to follow. No discussing the resistance. We would whisper about the news from the outside world when we felt it was safe, but we avoided anything related to Paul or the group. It was a painful silence, a gnawing absence that filled the space between us. I longed to hear about the others, to know how they were faring, but I understood the necessity of this rule. Any slip of the tongue could lead to my discovery. The days stretched on, and I settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and unsettling. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of Bawa moving about the house, her footsteps a gentle reminder that life continued behind the basement walls. I would rise and prepare myself for another day of waiting, of hiding, of uncertainty. I occupied my time by organizing this small collection of items in the basement: an old sewing kit, a few tattered books, a dusty radio that hadn't been used in years. I read when I could, immersing myself in stories that took me far away from my reality. I would let my mind wander, imagining a future where I could emerge from this darkness, where I could once again feel the warmth of the sun and the laughter of friends. But even in these moments of distraction, I couldn't escape the reality that lingered in the back of my mind, the knowledge that Paul was suffering for our cause, that he might be enduring unimaginable pain, was a constant ache in my heart. Each day, I would tell myself that I had to be strong for him, that I had to survive not just for me, but for all of us. I had to believe that there was hope, that the resistance would continue to fight even if I was hidden away. By the fifth day, the fear of being discovered had settled into a dull throb at the back of my mind, a reminder of the stakes of my situation. I had become hyper-aware of every sound, every creak of the floorboards above, every whisper of wind that made its way through the cracks in the basement walls. The outside world felt more and more like a dream, a distant memory that I feared I would never reclaim. One afternoon, I heard the familiar sound of Bauer's footsteps descending the stairs. Relief washed over me, mixed with an unexpected wave of gratitude. She was my lifeline, the only person who understood what I was going through. "Are you all right?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern as she stepped into the basement. I nodded, forcing a smile even though my heart felt heavy. "Just thinking?" She sat down beside me, her presence a comforting weight. "It's been hard, I know, but you're doing well." "Some days I don't feel strong," I admitted, my voice cracking slightly. "I feel like I'm losing myself down here." She placed a hand on my knee, a small gesture of support. "You're not losing yourself, you're fighting." Her words sparked a flicker of hope within me, reminding me that I wasn't just waiting aimlessly, I was biding my time, gathering strength for whatever lay ahead. The basement was a prison, yes, but it was also a sanctuary, a place where I could plan my next move, where I could find solace amidst the chaos of the world above. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "You just have to trust in that." Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, sharp and insistent, echoing through the stillness of the basement. My heart raced, and I shot a glance at Bauer, whose expression shifted from calm to alert in an instant. "It's my brother," she whispered, urgency creeping into her voice. "Don't be scared, just hide somewhere." I nodded, adrenaline surging through my veins as I scanned the cramped basement for a place to conceal myself. I darted behind a stack of old crates, their dusty surfaces providing just enough cover. I pressed my back against the cool wood, straining to hear the muffled conversation happening above me. "Marta, it's me." Her brother's voice cut through the air, filled with a mix of impatience and concern. Among everything, the Marta got me. I always knew her as Bauer, or teacher. I crouched behind the crates, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened instantly. I could hear her footsteps moving toward the door, the creaking floorboards amplifying the silence that hung heavily in the air. The tension was palpable, and I strained to catch every word exchanged between them. When she opened the door, I could only imagine the look on her brother's face as he stepped inside. "Hey, how are you?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "Good, come in," she continued, trying to maintain an air of nonchalance. "There are rumors going around," he said, his voice tightening. "I heard from a friend that they might be searching houses in the area, looking for anyone who's gone missing. We need to be careful." My heart dropped at his words, the implication settling over me like a shroud. That means my father now knew what was I. I listened as the voices rose and fell, trying to glean as much information as I could without revealing my presence. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her eyes. "There are whispers of people running away, some resistance members," he replied, his tone serious. "You've been acting strange lately. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," she insisted too quickly. "Really, it's just the pressure of work and those kids at school. They're tiring, especially these days." "What are you hiding from?" he pressed, concern evident in his voice. I held my breath, pressing further back against the crates as I strained to hear. Would you discover my presence? The fear coursing through me felt suffocating. "Just promise me you'll be careful," he finally said. "If you hear anything, anything at all, you need to tell me." "I promise," she assured him, her voice trembling but determined. After a moment, he took a seat at a small table in the living room, pouring himself a cup of tea. I could hear the clink of the porcelain mug against the table, the soothing sound of contrasting sharply with the anxiety that filled the air. "Do you want some?" he asked, glancing toward the kitchen. "No, I'm fine," she replied quickly, her voice tight. They exchanged small talks, discussions about the weather and the neighborhood, but I could sense the underlying tension in their words. I focused on the warmth of the room, the comforting smell of tea wafting through the air coming down here, but it was hard to shake the feeling of impending danger. They kept talking, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. He spoke about his business, the struggles of keeping it afloat in such uncertain times. "People can't buy things anymore," he lamented, frustration lacing his words. "It's as if the world is crumbling around us." I felt a burning need to drink something to wash away the anxiety that clung to my throat. My heart raced, pounding like a drum in my chest. I reached for the water bottle next to me, unscrewing the cap with trembling hands. As I took a sip, I suddenly felt the water go down the wrong way, a sharp sting of panic rising within me. Choking, I tried to suppress the urge to cough, but it was futile. I struggled against the sensation, desperation flooding my senses. I heard him ask, "What is that?" in confusion, his voice tinged with concern. Bao's voice cut in, steady yet strained. "I don't know. The neighbors, I guess." I could barely register the words over the restless coughing that overtook me. Each heave felt like a betrayal of my body, and I knew I was on the brink of losing control. My vision blurred, and I fought against the encroaching darkness. I felt as if I was teetering on the edge of consciousness, my breath shallow and racked. "Okay, it's enough," Bauer said firmly, her voice breaking through the haze. I could feel her footsteps getting closer to the basement, and as I fought to regain my breath, I heard her call my name, the urgency in her tone cutting through my fog. "Hilda! Hilda, hey!" I could feel a hand on my back, gently guiding me, trying to soothe the storm within, but my throat felt like it was closing up, each cough becoming more desperate, more agonizing. "What's going on? Who's this?" I heard her brother ask, his voice suddenly serious, full of alarm. "Come help me!" Bauer screamed, her voice echoing in the confined place. I was barely conscious, teetering on the edge of awareness. I could hear the voices blending into a chaotic symphony around me, but the overwhelming pressure in my chest made it so hard to focus. I coughed again, a violent feat that sent waves of pain radiating through my body, leaving me gasping for air. As the world spun around me, I felt the warmth of Bauer's hand on my back, steadying me, but I couldn't shake the fear that I was slipping away. The air felt thick, and I fought to pull it into my lungs, each breath a battle I was losing.